Aloria watched the board with mild interest as the final piece slid into place. "How quaint," she murmured. "They actually completed it." Across the celestial plane, her brother's laughter echoed. "You sound surprised. You designed the game yourself." "I designed it centuries ago. I'd almost forgotten it was still circulating." She leaned closer, examining the four mortal souls now suspended between worlds. "Though I must admit, this set is particularly entertaining. Look at this one." She gestured at Carol's essence. "So certain she can logic her way through divine intervention." "And the other three?" "One believes in intuition she can't explain. One wants to be a hero. And this last one," Aloria smiled, "this one will surprise even herself." Her brother's form materialized beside her, darkness coalescing into something almost solid. "You're splitting them. That's cruel, even for you." "Cruel? I'm giving them exactly what they need. 2 go to those who pray for salvation. 2 go to those who pray for survival." She moved the pieces with a delicate finger. "The mortals below think they're summoning champions. They have no idea they're pawns in a much older game." "What's the wager this time?" Aloria's eyes gleamed. "If the humans win, you owe me a century of worship from your realm. If the demons triumph, I grant you the same from mine." "And if the 4 women refuse to play?" "They won't. They've already chosen their pieces. Crown and star to the light, flame and sword to the shadow." She sat back, satisfied. "The game has begun, dear brother. Now we simply watch and see which side breaks first." The 4 souls separated, pulled toward their destinies, unaware that gods were gambling on their choices. "Welcome to the Portal Library. Step through and let the magic begin." Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd love more stories or have a request. New videos uploaded every Friday. Crown and Abyss Episode 1. The Summoning. Prologue. The game. There are certain evenings that feel ordinary, until they aren't. Carol's apartment on the 3rd Thursday of October was one such evening. The space reflected its owner, organized without being sterile, comfortable without excess. A bookshelf arranged by genre, throw pillows that matched the couch in a deliberate palette of gray and cream. Even the snacks laid out on the coffee table showed planning. A cheese board with precisely spaced crackers, grapes washed and patted dry, wine glasses positioned at equal intervals. Carol sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by wrapped gifts in various states of being opened. Tissue paper pooled around her like colored snow. Her 3 friends occupied the couch and armchair, wine glasses in hand, still laughing at something Kathy had said about Carol's organizational habits. "I still can't believe you planned your own bachelorette party," Kathy said, gesturing with her wine in a way that made the liquid slosh dangerously close to the rim. Carol glanced up from the gift she was unwrapping, a set of kitchen towels with embroidered herbs that she actually liked. "Why would I let someone else plan something when I already know what I want?" "Most brides would demand a weekend in Vegas or something," Angel pointed out. She was sprawled in the armchair with her shoes kicked off, looking entirely at home. "We can do Vegas when we all have actual vacation days to use," Carol replied. This made more sense. We get to talk, I get to open gifts, and we save money for a trip where we'll actually have time to enjoy it. Rema smiled from her corner of the couch. "You made a spreadsheet for this, didn't you?" "Obviously," Carol replied. The 4 of them had been friends for nearly 3 years now, having met through work at a tech company none of them worked for anymore. They bonded over shared frustration with corporate politics and discovered they genuinely enjoy each other's company outside of complaining about their jobs. Even after going their separate ways career-wise, they maintained the friendship with deliberate effort. Carol reached for another gift, this one from Angel. Inside was a leather-bound planner with her new married initials embossed on the cover. "For keeping your new husband organized," Angel said with a grin. "He's already organized, that's why it works," Carol replied, but she looked pleased. She ran her fingers over the embossing. Carol Chen Park. It still felt strange, the idea that in 2 months she'd have a different last name. She'd met James on a dating app she'd downloaded as what she'd called a controlled experiment in modern romance. The fact that it had actually worked, that she'd found someone who thought like she did, who appreciated her need for structure and routine, felt almost statistically improbable. Carol considered this while wrapping the discarded tissue paper into a neat ball. "He's logical. We make sense together. We're two peas in a pod. That's adorable, Kathy said. That's practical, Carol corrected, but she smiled. Rema watched the exchange with quiet amusement. She'd always been the observant one, content to listen, more than she spoke. You can admit it's romantic, you know. Logic and romance aren't mutually exclusive. Fair point, Carol conceded. She reached for the next gift, this one wrapped in paper that looked older than the others. The tape had yellowed slightly, and there was no card attached. Carol frowned, turning it over in her hands. This one doesn't have a tag, she said. Angel sat up straighter. Maybe it fell off. Carol checked the floor around her, then shook her head. I don't see one. The shipping label just has my name and address. No return address. Mystery gift, Kathy said, with obvious delight. Open it. Rema shifted in her seat, something in her expression tightening. She'd always been sensitive to things that felt off, though she'd never quite been able to explain what triggered that instinct. This gift triggered it now. Carol unwrapped it carefully, revealing a wooden box underneath. The wood was dark with age, the surface carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift slightly when looked at from different angles. Symbols that felt almost familiar, but weren't quite anything recognizable. The craftsmanship was beautiful, in a way that made the hair on Rema's arms stand up. That's gorgeous, Angel said. That's creepy, Rema said at the same time. Carol opened the box. Inside was a game, though calling it a board game felt insufficient. There was a board, yes, but also cards with strange symbols, dice made of materials that didn't look quite like plastic or wood, and 4 tokens that seemed to catch the light in unusual ways. Everything about it felt old, well-preserved but undeniably aged. A small card rested on top of the components. Carol pulled it out and read aloud. For Carol and her companions, open tonight, play together, good fortune awaits those who finish the game. She paused. It's signed, a well-wisher. That's ominous, Rema said flatly. It's probably from a relative I forgot about, Carol replied, some aunt with a weird sense of humor. Or it's cursed, Rema said in a serious tone. Angel laughed. You think everything is cursed. Not everything, just things that show up mysteriously with no return address and cryptic notes. Kathy had already leaned forward to examine the game more closely. It looks like one of those vintage parlor games, the kind they play at seances or something. We're not having a seance at my bachelorette party, Carol said. But we could play the game, Kathy suggested. When else are we going to get a mysterious antique game? You really want to play something from an unmarked package? Carol met her gaze steadily. It's a board game, Rema. What's the worst that could happen? Rema didn't have an answer for that, which bothered her more than she wanted to admit. She just knew, in the way she sometimes knew things without being able to explain them, that opening this game was a bad idea. But she also knew that saying so would sound paranoid, and she'd already been labeled the cautious one enough times to recognize when pushing further would just make her look irrational. Fine, she said quietly, but I'm going on record as saying this feels wrong. They set up the game on the coffee table, moving aside the cheese board and wine glasses. The board unfolded larger than expected, revealing a surface covered in pathways that spiraled inward toward a central point. The patterns seemed to shimmer faintly in the lamplight, though that could have been a trick of the finish. Angel found a scroll of paper tucked into the bottom of the box. Here are the rules. She unrolled it and read. Each player chooses a token. Roll to determine order. Draw cards, move pieces. First to reach the center wins. That's it? Carol asked. That's it. Weirdly simple for something this elaborate, Angel observed. Maybe we have to figure it out as we go, Kathy suggested. They each chose a token. Carol picked the crown, drawn to its geometric precision. Rema chose the flame, though she couldn't have explained why. Kathy selected the star with immediate certainty. Angel took the sword. Carol rolled first, the dice clattering across the board and landing on 6. She moved her crown piece 6 spaces, and the path beneath it glowed faintly for just a moment before fading. She blinked, wondering if she'd imagined it. Did the board just light up? Kathy asked. Must be part of the design, Carol said, though she sounded less certain than usual. The game progressed in a way that felt both simple and strange. They drew cards with phrases that seemed profound but meaningless. Embrace your destiny. Sacrifice brings reward. The path diverges. They laughed about it, treating the cryptic messages like fortune cookies. But as they played, small things began happening that none of them mentioned at first, each assuming they were imagining it. A die would land on one number, then seem to flicker to another for just an instant. The cards felt warm to the touch, though the apartment wasn't particularly heated. The pieces sometimes appeared to have moved slightly when no one was looking directly at them. Rema felt her unease growing with each turn. This wasn't right. The game felt alive in a way games shouldn't feel, but every time she opened her mouth to say something, the moment passed, and the game continued normally, and she couldn't quite articulate what was bothering her beyond a feeling she knew the others wouldn't understand. After perhaps 20 minutes, Carol landed on the center space. "I think I won," she said, though it came out as more of a question than a statement. The board began to glow, not subtly this time, but with clear, undeniable light emanating from the center and spreading outward along the pathways. "Okay," Angel said slowly, "that's definitely not normal." One of the pieces, Kathy's star, moved on its own, just a few inches, but unmistakably without anyone touching it. All four women froze. Rema stood up abruptly. "We need to stop this. Now." "What the hell?" Angel was staring at the board. "The pieces are moving by themselves." All four tokens had begun sliding across the board, orbiting the center in a pattern that made no sense according to any rules they'd been following. "Carol," Kathy's voice had gone tight with fear. "What did the rules say happens when someone wins?" Carol grabbed the scroll with shaking hands and scanned it again. "They didn't. It just says first to the center wins. It doesn't say what you win." The lights in the apartment flickered, then went out entirely, leaving them in darkness broken only by the glow from the board, which had grown bright enough to cast shadows. "Turn it off," Rema said. "Carol, turn it off." Carol reached for the board, trying to fold it closed, to make it stop, to end whatever was happening. The moment her fingers touched the center, the light exploded outward. Carol tried to pull her hand back, but couldn't move. None of them could move. They were frozen in place while the light intensified, while sound cut out, and was replaced by a high-pitched ringing that seemed to come from inside their skulls rather than the air around them. The four tokens lifted off the board, suspended in the light, and then they separated. Crown and star pulled in one direction, dragged by a force none of them could see or resist. Flame and sword pulled in the opposite direction. Carol reached for Rema, or tried to. Kathy's hand stretched toward Angel's, but the light was between them now, and their fingers couldn't bridge the distance. Rema was screaming Carol's name, but no sound emerged. The last thing Carol saw before the white consumed everything was her three friends, reaching for her and each other, before they were torn apart and scattered into nothing. Chapter 1. The Palace. Carol woke to the sensation of cold stone beneath her palms and the smell of incense heavy in the air. Her first coherent thought was that she'd fallen asleep on the floor of her apartment, which made no sense because she'd been sitting at the coffee table. As consciousness fully returned and she opened her eyes, she realized that she wasn't in her apartment at all. She was lying on polished white marble that reflected light from sources she couldn't immediately identify. The surface beneath her hands was carved with intricate patterns that glowed faintly with a golden light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with something she couldn't quite name. "Carol?" Kathy's voice, small and confused, came from somewhere close by. Carol pushed herself up to sit and found Kathy a few feet away, also on the marble floor, blinking in bewilderment at their surroundings. They were inside what could only be described as a cathedral, though unlike any Carol had ever seen. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by columns carved with the same symbols as the floor. Light streamed through windows of colored glass that depicted scenes Carol couldn't parse, figures in flowing robes, and creatures with too many wings. And they weren't alone. At least 30 people stood in a circle around them, all dressed in elaborate robes or armor that looked ceremonial rather than practical. At the far end of the chamber, elevated on a dais, sat a man wearing a crown of gold and crystal. His robes were deep purple, embroidered with thread that caught the light. He was perhaps 50, with grays at his temples and an expression of profound satisfaction on his face. Carol's mind, even in its disoriented state, cataloged everything with automatic efficiency. Large chamber, 30-plus witnesses. Man in crown equals authority figure, possibly monarch. Ceremonial dress suggests ritual or formal occasion. No obvious exits visible from current position. "Where are we?" Kathy whispered. Before Carol could respond, one of the robed figures stepped forward. The robe was white, trimmed with gold, and the person wearing it moved with the kind of deliberate grace that suggested either extensive training or genuine reverence for the moment. When they spoke, their voice carried through the chamber without shouting. The ritual has succeeded. Praise be to Eloria, the radiant mother, she who sees all paths. Carol opened her mouth to ask what ritual, but the words that came out surprised her. Not because of what she said, but because she understood what the robed figure had said. The language hadn't been English. She was certain of that. The sounds were wrong, the cadence unfamiliar, and yet she'd understood every word as clearly as if it had been spoken in her native tongue. Kathy was staring at the robed figure, with wide eyes, and Carol realized she must have understood too. The robed figure continued, addressing not Carol and Kathy, but the assembled crowd. The prophecy spoken in the days of the First Kingdom has come to pass. 2 champions, pure of heart and strong of spirit, had answered the call across the void. They stand before us now, blessed by the goddess herself, marked as the heroes of liberation who will guide us through the coming darkness. The crowd murmured, a sound of reverence and relief that Carol found deeply unsettling for reasons she couldn't articulate. The man on the throne stood. His voice, when he spoke, had the practiced quality of someone accustomed to being heard. I am Emperor Aldrich Thane, sovereign of the Luminae Empire and keeper of the radiant faith. On behalf of all humanity within these borders and beyond, I welcome you, heroes. Your arrival brings hope to a realm that has known little of it in recent years. Carol finally found her voice. What's happening? Where are we? How did we get here? The Emperor smiled, but it was the priest who answered. You have been summoned, as was foretold, brought across the boundaries of worlds by the grace of Eloria to stand as champions in humanity's hour of need. Summoned, Carol repeated. The word felt inadequate to describe waking up in a cathedral after touching a board game in her living room. From where? How? From your world to ours, the priest said, as if this explained everything. The ritual of calling has not been performed in centuries, but the need has grown dire. The demon hordes press against our borders with increasing ferocity. Villages fall, trade routes are severed. Our people suffer. The priest's expression softened slightly. But you need not fear. You have been chosen specifically because you possess the qualities necessary to face this threat. The goddess does not make mistakes in her selections. Kathy had gotten to her feet, and Carol followed suit, her legs unsteady. The marble floor was hard beneath her shoes. The incense smell was making her slightly dizzy. None of this felt like a dream, which meant either it was an incredibly elaborate prank, or something impossible was happening. You said we were blessed, Kathy said, her voice stronger than Carol expected. What does that mean? The priest gestured, and Carol noticed for the first time that both she and Kathy were wearing different clothes than they'd had on at the apartment. Instead of casual party attire, they now wore simple white tunics and pants, made of material that felt too fine to be cotton. When had that happened? During the summoning? While they were unconscious? The blessing of Eloria manifests in many ways, the priest explained. You can understand and speak all languages spoken within this realm. You will find yourselves resistant to common ailments. Your capacity to learn and adapt will be enhanced. And as you grow into your roles, other gifts may reveal themselves. These are the marks of her favor, granted so that you may fulfill the purpose for which you were called. If they were speaking a different language, she should be aware of it. She should feel the translation happening. But she didn't. The words simply made sense, as if she'd always known this language, which was impossible. We need to go home, she said, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. We have lives, jobs, families. I'm getting married in 2 months. The Emperor descended from the dais, his robes trailing behind him. Up close, he looked older, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years of responsibility. I understand this must be overwhelming. You have been torn from your world without warning or preparation. For that, I offer my deepest apologies. But the summoning is not a thing that can be easily undone. The ritual that brought you here required enormous power and precise timing. Returning you would require, he paused, resources we do not currently possess. But it can be done, Carol pressed. Perhaps in time. The Emperor's expression was sympathetic but firm. For now you are here, and while I would not keep you against your will if such a choice were possible, I must ask you to consider what is at stake. My people are dying, children are orphaned, entire communities are destroyed. The Demon King's forces grow bolder with each passing season. We have fought them for decades, but we cannot hold forever without aid. Kathy had been quiet, and Carol glanced over to find her friend staring at the Emperor with an expression caught between fear and something else. Hope, maybe. Or wonder. You mentioned a prophecy, Kathy said. What does it say? About us? The priest stepped forward again. The prophecy of the twin stars, recorded in the archives of the First Kingdom. It speaks of a time when darkness threatens to consume the light, when two heroes from beyond the veil would arrive to turn the tide. Two champions who would be marked by the goddess herself, who would wield power not of this world, who would stand as beacons against the shadow. It sounded, Carol thought, remarkably vague, the kind of prophecy that could be interpreted to fit almost any situation if you tried hard enough. But looking around at the faces of the assembled nobles and priests, she saw genuine belief. These people thought she and Kathy were the answer to their prayers. Where are our friends? Carol asked suddenly. There were 4 of us. 2 others. Where did they go? The priest's expression didn't change. The summoning called for 2 heroes. The ritual was precise in its requirements. Your companions remain in your world, unharmed and unaffected by what has transpired here. How do you know that? Carol demanded. Because the ritual cannot pull those it is not designed to claim, the priest replied with unshakable certainty. If 4 had been meant to come, 4 would have arrived. That only 2 stand before us is evidence that only 2 were chosen. Carol wanted to argue, but she didn't have the information to challenge the claim. She didn't know how this summoning worked or what its limitations were. You must be exhausted, the Emperor said, and Carol realized she was, suddenly and profoundly. The adrenaline that had carried her through the initial confusion was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. You have undergone an ordeal that would break lesser spirits. Please, allow us to provide you with quarters where you may rest. Tonight, we will hold a feast in your honor, so that you may meet the representatives of the kingdom and begin to understand the world you now find yourselves in. But for now, rest. Carol wanted to protest, to demand more answers, to insist they find a way to send them home immediately. But the truth was, she didn't know enough about this situation to know what to demand. She needed time to think, to figure out what questions she should even be asking. Our chambers should be near each other, Kathy said quietly, and Carol felt a rush of gratitude for her friend's presence. At least they weren't alone in this. Of course, the Emperor said. You will be housed in the eastern wing of the palace, in quarters befitting your station. Your rooms will adjoin, connected by a shared sitting area, so that you may have privacy or companionship as you prefer. 2 attendants appeared, both women in simple but well-made dresses. They bowed and gestured for Carol and Kathy to follow. Carol hesitated, looking back at the Emperor and the priest. We'll talk more, she said. As much as you wish, the Emperor replied. You are honored guests. All that we have is at your disposal. The attendants led them through corridors with high ceilings painted with murals depicting battles and coronations. Windows overlooking gardens that looked too perfect to be real. Marble and gold and crystal everywhere, catching light and throwing it back in cascades of color. Carol tried to memorize the route, but after the 4th turn, she gave up. Their quarters, when they reached them, were more restrained than the corridors, but still excessive by any standard Carol knew. 2 bedrooms connected by a sitting room, furnished with comfortable chairs and a low table. Windows looked out over the palace grounds. Fresh flowers sat in vases on every available surface. The beds were larger than any Carol had slept in, with pillows that looked absurdly soft. The attendants bowed again and withdrew, closing the doors behind them. For a long moment, Carol and Kathy just stood in the sitting room, looking at each other. What the hell just happened? Kathy said finally. Carol sat down heavily in one of the chairs. Your guess is as good as mine. Do you think they're telling the truth? About Rema and Angel being safe? Kathy asked. I don't know. I hope so. We're in a different world, apparently. We can speak a language we don't know. We're supposed to fight demons. None of this makes sense. Kathy sat across from her. That we'd be able to adapt and learn. The priest said a lot of things. Carol leaned back, staring at the painted ceiling. I need to figure out what's real and what's not. You think they're manipulating us? I think we just got pulled into another world and told we're heroes in a prophecy. I think that's a situation where we should be very careful about who we trust and what we believe. Kathy was quiet for a moment. What if it's real, though? What if there really are demons killing people and we actually can help? Carol looked at her friend. Kathy's expression was complicated. Fear and excitement and uncertainty, all mixed together. You want to believe them? I don't know what I want, Kathy admitted. I'm terrified, but also, I mean, we're in another world, Carol. We can understand a language we've never heard. Magic is real. This is impossible, but it's happening. Maybe we are supposed to be here. Or maybe we're just convenient pawns in someone else's game, Carol replied. Maybe, Kathy conceded. But we won't know unless we learn more. And tonight, there's a feast. We'll meet people, see more of this place. Maybe we'll get answers. Carol wanted to argue, but Kathy had a point. They needed information, and isolating themselves wouldn't provide it. Fine, we go to the feast. We observe. We ask careful questions. And we don't commit to anything until we understand what's actually happening. Agreed, Kathy said. Then, softer, I'm scared. Me too. But also what? Kathy smiled, just a little. Part of me has always wanted something like this, something magical and impossible. I know that sounds stupid given the circumstances. It doesn't sound stupid, Carol said, though privately she thought it was dangerously naive. But Kathy's enthusiasm wasn't a flaw. It was just who she was. And right now, with everything uncertain and terrifying, maybe a little enthusiasm would help them survive whatever came next. They rested for several hours. Carol tried to sleep, but couldn't, her mind churning through everything that had happened and every question she didn't have answers to. Eventually, she gave up and sat by the window, watching the palace grounds below. Gardens with paths that curved in mathematically pleasing patterns. Fountains with water that caught the light. People moving about their business with no apparent awareness that two visitors from another world had just arrived. When the attendants returned to help them dress for the feast, Carol didn't resist. The clothes they were given were beautiful, layers of fabric in deep blue and silver that moved like water. Kathy's were similar, but in shades of gold. The feast was held in a hall that made their quarters look modest by comparison. Long tables set with silver and crystal. Hundreds of people in formal dress. Nobles and military officers and scholars. Music played from somewhere Carol couldn't see. The ceiling overhead was painted with a massive mural depicting a woman with flowing hair and eyes that seemed to look directly at whoever stood beneath them. The goddess, Carol assumed, Aloria. They were seated at the high table next to the emperor. Course after course arrived, each more elaborate than the last. Carol ate mechanically, her attention on the room and the people in it. Kathy, beside her, seemed more engaged, asking questions about the food and the music and the people they were meeting. Between courses, nobles approached to introduce themselves and express their gratitude. A general who commanded the Eastern armies, a minister of trade, a scholar who studied ancient texts. Each one thanked them for coming, for answering the call, for bringing hope. And then there was the magic. Halfway through the feast, mages in deep blue robes emerged and began what they called a display of welcome. Light formed shapes in the air above the tables, creatures that moved and fought and dissolved into cascades of color. Fire danced without burning. Water formed sculptures that held their shape before collapsing back into droplets. It was beautiful. Is it always like this? Kathy whispered to the emperor during one particularly elaborate display of a dragon made of light, battling a swarm of smaller creatures. The feast? No. This is special, in your honor, the emperor smiled, though we do enjoy celebrating when there is cause. After the displays, there was dancing. Carol declined every invitation, but Kathy accepted several, allowing herself to be led onto the floor by various nobles, who all seemed eager to dance with one of the heroes. Carol watched from the table, analyzing the social dynamics, the way people grouped and regrouped, the subtle hierarchies visible in who deferred to whom. It was late when the feast finally ended. Carol's head ached from the noise and the crowds and the constant performance of gratitude. As they were escorted back to their quarters, Kathy practically glowed with excitement. That was incredible, she said as soon as they were alone again. Did you see the magic? The way they made light solid? And everyone was so kind. The general told me about the northern campaigns, and the scholar explained some of the history of the empire. And Carol held up a hand. Kathy. What? Did you notice anything strange about tonight? Kathy frowned. Everything was strange. We're in another world. No, I mean specifically. Think about the people we met, the stories we heard. What was consistent? Kathy considered. They all seemed really grateful we were here. And what else? They all talked about the demon threat? Right. Every single person we met had lost someone to demons or knew someone who had. Every story was about demon attacks, demon raids, demon cruelty. Because that's what's happening, Kathy said slowly. Or because that's what we were meant to hear. Carol sat in one of the chairs. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm saying everything tonight was very carefully orchestrated. We met specific people, heard specific stories, saw magic that proved this world operates by different rules. And all of it pointed to the same conclusion. Demons bad, we're needed, trust the Empire. You think it was propaganda? I think it was a very effective introduction designed to make us feel welcome and important, and aligned with their cause. Carol rubbed her eyes, which doesn't mean they're wrong. Just means we should be careful about assuming everything we're told is the complete truth. Kathy was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. She hesitated. Carol, even if this is all manipulation, even if they're using us, those people tonight really have lost family. The demon threat isn't made up. I know, Carol replied softly. So even if we're being manipulated, it doesn't mean helping is wrong. Carol wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Kathy was right. The two things could coexist. They could be pawns in someone else's plan and still be doing something genuinely necessary. The problem was figuring out which parts were real and which parts were carefully constructed narrative designed to keep them compliant. They separated to their rooms eventually. Carol lay in the oversized bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Rema and Angel and James and the wedding that might never happen. Thinking about a world she didn't understand and a role she hadn't asked for. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she'd start looking for answers. I hope you are enjoying this story so far. Let me know in the comments below, which character do you most identify with? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 2. The Demon Realm. Rema woke to pain. Not the dull ache of sleeping in a weird position or the sharp sting of an injury, but something deeper and more fundamental. Pain that felt like it was coming from inside her bones, from the marrow outward, reshaping everything it touched. Her skin felt too tight, her joints bent at angles that weren't quite right. Even breathing hurt, each inhale scraping against lungs that seemed to have relocated slightly within her chest. She tried to open her eyes and found that even that simple action had changed. Her eyelids moved differently, the muscles responding with unfamiliar strength. When her vision finally focused, the world looked wrong. Colors were shifted, some too bright and others muted into gray. And she could see in the darkness around her with a clarity that shouldn't have been possible. The darkness itself was the next thing she noticed. She was lying on stone, rough and uneven beneath her body. The air smelled of sulfur and something else, something organic and rotting. Angel? Her voice came out wrong, rougher and lower than it should have been. The sound of it startled her so badly, she tried to sit up too quickly and immediately regretted it. Her body moved with too much force, muscles responding with strength she hadn't anticipated. She crashed forward onto her hands and froze. Her hands were wrong. The skin was darker than it should have been, a gray-green that looked corpse-like in the dim light. Her fingers were longer, the joints more pronounced, and her nails had become something closer to claws. She could feel ridges along the backs of her hands, raised patterns that felt like scales when she touched them with trembling fingers. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, what happened to me?" "Rema?" Angel's voice, also wrong and too rough, came from somewhere to her left. "What's wrong with my voice? Why does everything sound weird?" Rema turned toward the sound and saw Angel pushing herself upright a few feet away. In the darkness that Rema could somehow see through perfectly, Angel looked monstrous. Her skin had the same gray-green cast, her features subtly rearranged. Her eyes reflected light like an animal's, and when she opened her mouth in shock, Rema saw teeth that were too sharp. "Your face," Rema managed. Angel's hands went to her cheeks, feeling the changes. Her eyes widened. "What happened to us?" Rema looked down at her own body. The white tunic and pants from Carol's apartment were gone, replaced by rough cloth that felt like burlap against her altered skin. She could see her arms were covered in the same scaled texture as her hands. Her legs, when she shifted them, moved with joints that bent slightly differently than before. "We're not human anymore," she said, and the reality of those words hit her so hard she had to fight down the urge to vomit. Something changed us. Angel was examining her own hands now, turning them over in the dim light. "This is real. This is actually real. We're not dreaming?" "No." Rema tried to stand, and found that her sense of balance was completely off. She staggered, caught herself against the rough stone wall beside her. The texture of it was overwhelming against her altered palm, every ridge and crevice distinct, in a way that made her want to pull away. But she forced herself to stay upright, to take stock of where they were. They were in some kind of cave or alcove. The opening ahead showed more darkness beyond, but Rema could see movement out there, shapes passing by, and sounds, voices speaking in a language that made no sense, harsh and guttural and entirely incomprehensible. "Where are we?" Angel asked. She'd gotten to her feet as well, moving with the same unsteady gait. "Where are Carol and Kathy?" "I don't know." Rema's mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. They'd been playing the game. Carol had won. The light had pulled them apart. And then, this. Angel looked down at herself again, and Rema could hear the edge of panic in her voice. "Why do we look like this?" Before Rema could answer, a figure appeared in the opening of their alcove. Rema's new eyes registered details immediately. The figure was humanoid, but definitely not human. Skin covered in dark scales, eyes that were solid black with no visible pupils, a mouth full of sharp teeth. It wore armor of some kind, metal plates strapped over a torso that was too broad and too muscular. The figure looked at them and said something in that incomprehensible language. When neither of them responded, it spoke again, louder and more insistent. "We don't understand," Rema said, though she had no idea if the creature could understand her any better than she could understand it. The figure's expression shifted to something that might have been annoyance. It gestured sharply toward the opening, clearly indicating they should move. "I think it wants us to leave," Angel said quietly. "Or it's going to make us leave?" Rema replied. The figure gestured again, more aggressive this time, and took a step toward them. Rema made a decision. She moved toward the opening, keeping her hands visible in what she hoped was a non-threatening gesture. Angel followed close behind. They emerged from the alcove into a narrow passage carved through stone. The walls were rough and water-stained, dripping with moisture that smelled faintly of minerals. The passage was lit by something that glowed from cracks in the rock, a bioluminescent fungus, or lichen, that cast everything in a sickly green light. More figures moved through the passage, all of them similar to the one that had found them. Scaled skin in various colors, dark greens and browns and grays. Different body types, some massive and hulking, others lean and quick-moving, but all unmistakably not human. The figure from the alcove prodded them forward, and they walked. The passage opened into a larger tunnel, which in turn connected to others. The space became a warren of interconnected passages, some natural cave formations, and others clearly carved by hand or claw. More figures appeared, going about business Rema couldn't parse, carrying bundles, hauling carts, arguing in their harsh language. None of them seemed particularly interested in Rema and Angel, which was somehow more unsettling than if they'd been threatening. They were just part of the traffic, two more bodies in a crowded space. The passage eventually opened into something larger, a cavern so vast Rema couldn't see the far walls. And in that cavern was a city. Buildings carved into the rock face, stacked on top of each other, in ways that defied normal architecture. Bridges spanning gaps between different levels. Light sources scattered throughout, some magical and flickering, others simply torches. The whole thing rose up in layers, a vertical city built into the walls of an enormous underground space. "Oh my God," Angel breathed. The figure that had been hurting them said something and pointed toward a structure near the cavern floor. Then it turned and walked away, leaving them standing at the edge of the city with no idea what they were supposed to do. "What now?" Angel asked. Rema looked around. Figures moved past them without stopping, intent on their own purposes. The city hummed with activity, voices and movement, and the sounds of work being done. It was chaotic but organized, a functioning society that just happened to be populated by creatures from nightmares. "We figure out where that thing pointed to," Rema said, "and we hope it was somewhere that can help us." They walked into the city, and Rema felt every eye that turned their way. Not many, but enough. Enough to know they stood out somehow, though she couldn't tell if it was because they looked different or because they were clearly lost. The building the creature had pointed to turned out to be some kind of civic structure, larger than the others around it, and with symbols carved above the entrance. Inside was a large room with a counter manned by a creature who looked bored with existence. When Rema and Angel entered, they barely glanced up. Rema tried speaking. "We need help. We don't know where we are." The figure stared at her with those solid black eyes, then said something that might have been a question. "We can't understand you," Angel said, frustration creeping into her voice. The figure seemed to realize the problem. It reached under the counter and pulled out a slate with symbols carved into it. It pointed at the symbols, then at Rema and Angel, then made a gesture that seemed to indicate writing. I think it wants to know if we can read, Rema said. Angel shook her head. Those symbols don't mean anything to me. They tried a different slate, this one with different symbols, then another. Finally, on the fourth attempt, it pulled out one covered in crude drawings rather than text. It pointed at a drawing that seemed to depict a humanoid figure, then at Rema and Angel. Yes, Rena said, pointing at herself and Angel. That's us. We're like this. She gestured at her transformed body. The creature made a sound that might have been understanding. It pulled out a piece of paper and sketched quickly, then turned it around. The drawing showed two figures entering a doorway. It pointed at the drawing, then pointed deeper into the building. I think we're supposed to go in there, Angel said. The room beyond the counter held several other creatures, all of whom looked up when Rema and Angel entered. One of them stood and approached, saying something in that incomprehensible language. When Rema shook her head, they tried something different. It held up fingers. 1, 2, 3. Then it pointed at Rema and Angel and held up 2 fingers. 2, Rema said in English. Yes, 2 of us. It seemed satisfied. It gestured for them to follow, and led them to a smaller room where another one sat behind a desk covered in papers. This one looked older, with scars across its scaled face, and a demeanor that suggested experience. The younger one spoke to the older one, gesturing at Rema and Angel. The older one listened, then looked them over with an expression Rema couldn't read. Finally, it pulled out a box from under the desk. Inside were small metal tokens. It held up 2, showed them to Rema and Angel, then placed them on the desk. Then it pulled out a paper with a map drawn on it. The creature pointed at a specific location on the map, then at the tokens, then made a gesture that seemed to indicate sleeping or resting. I think that's where we're supposed to stay, Angel said. The creature then pointed at another location on the map. This one had a drawing of what might have been food or supplies, then pointed at the tokens again. The tokens are for getting food? Rema guessed. The creature pushed the tokens across the desk toward them. Then it made a different gesture, more complicated, pointing at various locations on the map and moving its hands in various ways. We have to work for more, I think, Angel said quietly. The creature stood and gestured toward the door, clearly dismissing them. Rema gathered the tokens in the map. Thank you, she said, though she had no idea if it understood. Back outside, they stood in the street and looked at the map. The location for housing was several levels up, accessed by what looked like a series of carved staircases. We should find it before dark, Angel said, then laughed bitterly, assuming there even is a concept of day and night here. They climbed. The staircases were steep and uneven, clearly designed for bodies that moved differently than human ones used to. Rema's new form handled them better than her old one would have, which was both helpful and deeply disturbing. The housing turned out to be a room barely large enough for 2 people, carved into the rock wall and accessible only by a narrow passage. Inside was stone floor, 2 thin mats that might serve as beds, and nothing else. No windows, because they were underground. No door. Just an opening covered by a threadbare curtain. Rema and Angel stood in the tiny space and looked at each other. This is where we're supposed to live? Angel said flatly. For now. Rema sat on one of the mats. It was thin enough that she could feel the stone beneath it. Until we figure out what's happening. Angel sat on the other mat. In the dim light filtering in from the passage, she looked tired. Do you think Carol and Kathy are okay? I hope so. Rema pulled her knees up to her chest, then immediately regretted it when her new joints protested the position. I hope there's somewhere better than this. What if we can't get back? Angel's voice was small. What if we're stuck like this? Rema didn't have an answer for that. She looked down at her scaled hands, at the claws where her fingernails should have been. She could feel her heartbeat, faster than it used to be, pounding against ribs that were shaped slightly wrong. Everything about her body felt alien, like she was wearing someone else's skin. We'll figure it out, she said, because she had to say something. We'll find a way to survive here, and we'll find Carol and Kathy, and we'll get home. How? I don't know yet, but we will. Angel was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm scared. Me too. They sat in silence as the sounds of the city filtered in from outside. Voices in a language they couldn't understand. The clatter of activity. The sense of a world that existed without caring whether they were part of it or not. Eventually, Angel spoke again. We should try to find food. Figure out what those tokens actually get us. Rema stood, her body protesting the movement with aches she didn't understand yet. Okay, Let's go. They made their way back down to the level marked on their map, following the crude drawing to what turned out to be a kind of market or distribution center. Creatures lined up at various stalls, exchanging tokens for bundles wrapped in cloth or carried in rough containers. Rema and Angel joined a line, watching how the others did it. When their turn came, the one behind the stall held out a hand. Rema placed one of her tokens in it. They examined it, then handed over a wrapped bundle. Back outside, they opened it. Inside was something that might have been bread, hard and dark and smelling faintly of char. And a piece of what could have been dried meat, though Rema couldn't identify what animal it might have come from. "We're supposed to eat this?" Angel said. "We don't have much choice." They found a spot against a wall and tried the food. It was tough and bland and barely edible. But Rema's stomach cramped with hunger that felt more intense than any she'd experienced before. She forced herself to eat slowly, trying to make the meager portion last. Around them, life continued. Merchants called out in that incomprehensible language. Children, or what might have been children, ran between the stalls. Workers hauled carts loaded with materials Rema couldn't identify. It was ordinary life, just lived by beings that looked like they'd stepped out of a horror film. "What are we now?" Angel said quietly. Rema looked at her friend's changed face, at the scales and the two sharp teeth and the eyes that reflected light. "We're still us underneath." "Are we? What if the changes aren't just physical? What if we start thinking differently, feeling differently?" It was the fear Rema had been avoiding, the possibility that the transformation wasn't finished, that it would continue until they weren't themselves anymore. "Then we'll fight it. We'll hold on to who we are." "How?" "By remembering. By talking about home. By not letting go of the people we used to be." Angel nodded slowly. "Okay, we remember. We stay ourselves." They finished their food in silence, watching the city move around them. When darkness finally came, signaled not by a sunset, but by the dimming of the magical lights throughout the cavern, they made their way back to their tiny room and lay on the thin mats. Rema stared at the stone ceiling and thought about Carol and Kathy, wondered where they were and whether they were safe. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow they would start adapting, learning, finding out how this world worked. Tonight, she just needed to survive the fear. Quote of the week: "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." James Baldwin. Thank you for listening to Crown and Abyss Episode 1, The Summoning. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you want to hear more, please like, subscribe, and comment.